The day of the school festival had arrived, and that morning Megumi was searching everywhere for Tomoya. Even checked the audio-visual room, but he was nowhere to be found. He had realized that the script written by Utaha was almost identical to the one in the book Metronome of Love. She tried to contact Tomoya and find him, wanting to convey that his decision regarding the script was very significant to Utaha. Megumi wondered if Tomoya understood this yet. She ran his school rooftop and sure enough saw Tomoya and Utaha arguing. Utaha was asking why Tomoya still couldn't understand her. She seemed screwy that she grabbed his collar, not wanting to hear what he was saying because it wasn't addressing her question. Utaha was furious that Tomoya was only seeing things superficially. After witnessing, Megumi quickly left. That afternoon, Tai and Utaha talked in a maid cafe. Tomoya told Utaha they had two main problems. First, as the story reached its climax, Utaha's script started to resemble a novel because it had too many explanations of each character's expressions and thoughts. This aspect clearly disrupted the game's pacing. Since the game already had ES and other supporting elements, there was no need to write explanations for things that were already evident. According to Tomoya, such as was actually distracting. Utaha thought that Tomoya meant would be better to omit those words from the game. Tomoya explained that in a visual, the story progresses as the player presses the continue button, and if nothing changes after pressing it, it doesn't involve the player in the story, which would ruin the game itself. Just as Tomoya was about to discuss second issue, Utaha, annoyed, interrupted him. She said that Tomoya wasn't just avoiding her question, but was also trying to oppose her, noting that he had become quite bold. Tomoya firmly stated that he wasn't up Utaha or belittling her work, but since it was a script for a game, Utaha slammed the table, startling the wasp who was bringing their food. Utaha said that wasn't the issue she was coned about. Tomoya also slammed the table, surprising the staff. He asked what Utaha's problem was, stating that game was a collaborative effort where everyone poured their heart and soul into making it. He confirmedly said that the script couldn't be the story was indeed amazing, but its delivery was the problem. Tomoya also admitted that he was really angry at Hit for realizing it too late. His words brought tears to Utaha's eyes. Tomoya begged her forgiveness. Utaha remained silent, continued to cry, making Tomoya more panicked as all the cafe patrons watched them. Tomoya and Utaha continued their conversation outside the Tomoya said that it wasn't Utaha's fault, but his own as the dyer, and he hadn't realized it because he had only been reading from text files. His perspective was clouded by the incredible story, especially the second part, which felt more like a novel, so the script wasn't suitable for a game. Tomoya assured her not to worry because there was still time to fight. He pleaded with Utaha to revise the script, but if she was unwilling, Moya would do it himself, even if it might lower the story's quality, because he was the director. Even if Utaha insisted on doing it, Tomoya would still proceed. That night, Tomoya started working on the script. Meanwhile, Megumi called Eriri and told her about Utaha's script needing a rewrite, and that Tomoya was going to fix it himself. Eriri asked about Utaha's situation. Megumi mentioned that Utaha was in Tomoya's room. Megumi was surprised that Eriri didn't react with her usual concern for the two of them. Eriri was confident that nothing would happen between them since one was busy fixing the script and the other had just had her script rejected. Eriri could understand Utaha's feelings as a creator whose work had been turned down. She said that it wasn't the time for her to worry about others because she would have a lot to do later, so for now, Eriri needed to finish her tasks as quickly as possible. Megumi then asked if Eriri wasn't attending the school festival or participating in the Miss Takoyaki contest that year, especially since Eriri had won it the previous year. However, Eriri replied that precisely because she had won last year, she had a reason not to participate this year. That night, Utaha woke up in Tomoya's room and saw him asleep in front of his computer. She covered him with a blanket and immediately began working on the script revisions. The next morning, Tomoya suddenly woke up, feeling panicked because he had fallen asleep. Utaha greeted him and said that the timing was perfect because she had almost finished reviewing the script revisions. Utaha explained that she tried to understand Tomoya's opinions while checking the parts that needed improvement. She had also marked sections she disagreed with or found clearly wrong, corrected missing words and typos, and added comments in several areas. Utaha then invited him to start the discussion. Tomoya was astonished to see so many revisions. Utaha mentioned that her award-winning debut manuscript had received twice as many revision notes from Mr. Mashida, and that it took about 2 years to reduce the notes to double digits. Utaha stated that writing isn't an easy job, so it's impossible for the first draft of her script for the game to be perfect right away. They began the revisions with Tomoya showing some text and dialogue to be included in the game. Utaha realized that light dialogue would be incorporated into the game, and she was confident she could finish it in a day. However, according to Tomoya, that wasn't necessary. Utaha only needed to review the revisions he had made. Utaha said that revising that part wasn't difficult, but the problem was incorporating both scripts into the game, especially since the two scripts had different story directions. Meguri's route had an action-adventure theme, while Ruri's route was a tragic romance. In Meguri's route, the story returned to the present time, whereas in Ruri's route, it depicted wandering aimlessly forever. In Meguri's route, everyone except Ruri ended up happy, but in Ruri's route, only Ruri and the protagonist found a small happiness. Utaha said that if Tomoya wanted to include both scripts in the game, the theme would become chaotic. Tomoya responded that Utaha was thinking like a novelist again, whereas having many mixed themes with unpredictable story directions was one of the strengths of dating simulation games. Tomoya mentioned two rules in dating simulation games. First, the female protagonist must be cute, and second, the game shouldn't be bound by rigid rules. Utaha then asked if the game Tomoya was making had the freedom to choose one of two routes with different story directions. However, Utaha's assumption was wrong. Tomoya said there would be 3 routes, with the third route being a beautiful ending where both Meguri and Ruri remained alive and found their respective happiness. Utaha called Tomoya foolish for adding another route in the middle of development that had to be completed by that weekend. If the script wasn't finished by Monday, Riri would struggle to create the illustrations. Utaha then asked why, if that was the case, Tomoya was doing something so ridiculous. It turned out that Tomoya was doing it because Utaha had made both female protagonists too compelling. Tomoya himself didn't know why he wanted both characters to live happily ever after. Maybe it was different from Yutaka Kasumi's previous works, but he just couldn't imagine a story where all the characters he loved didn't get to find happiness. Utaha admitted that writing like that wasn't her style, and because of that, she couldn't do it. If Tomoya really wanted to make that story, then why didn't he write it himself? Utaha said that maybe a creator shouldn't say something like that to their director, but between fellow creators, it shouldn't be a problem. Since it was Tomoya's ridiculous idea, he should be the one to write it himself. Tomoya then asked if Utaha was really okay with him inserting his lousy script into hers. Utaha told him not to be so self-deprecating because parts of his writing were already in her script. Besides, the rule was that it shouldn't be restricted by rigid conventions. After writing for half a day, Tomoya showed his work to Utaha and asked for her opinion. Utaha was surprised that he had written so much in just half a day, admitting that Tomoya was quite fast. She then sat in his chair and started reviewing his writing. There were so many things that needed fixing, from sections that were complete garbage, like some dialogues that didn't properly convey the characters' backgrounds, to inconsistencies in personality, emotions, and relationships. There were also plenty of boring sentences that had no real meaning. At first, Utaha had given Tomoya a chance to write because he had been bold enough to criticize her script. But in the end, his writing was nothing more than amateur work. Tomoya realized that meant he had to rewrite everything. Utaha told him to write as much as he could, and once everything was written down, they would revise it together. If they kept redoing everything while writing, they'd never finish. If none of his writing could be used, Utaha would help him as much as possible. She declared that with her own 2 hands, she would turn Tomoya into a great writer. That night, Tomoya worked hard to complete his script while Utaha soaked in his bathtub. As she bathed, she found herself crying as she remembered her conversation with Tomoya on the school rooftop. After finishing her bath, Utaha asked how far Tomoya had gotten. He told her he had reached the scene of Ruri's farewell. Utaha then sat in Tomoya's chair. Tomoya asked what she thought about giving players the option to chase after Ruri. Unfortunately, Utaha was too sleepy to think at that moment. Tomoya told her to get some rest, and Utaha asked him to wake her up in 2 hours. Before going to sleep, she unbuttoned her shirt on purpose. Not long after, Tomoya grabbed a blanket to cover her, but the moment he saw her exposed skin, he immediately screamed in shock. The next morning, neither Tomoya nor Utaha attended the school festival events and only showed up for the bonfire. That morning, Utaha asked Tomoya if a neatly wrapped up ending like that really existed. She didn't want to say it, but she felt that Ruri didn't deserve happiness because she was too obsessive. She even eliminated Meguri and the other female protagonists just to have the main protagonist for herself. However, Tomoya actually liked that side of Ruri. Utaha then asked if he liked Ruri more than Meguri. Tomoya replied that he liked both of them because they were both special heroines. He said that Meguri and Ruri fought over the protagonist, got jealous, and made everyone laugh and get frustrated. Wasn't that the kind of unpredictable ending everyone wanted to see? Utaha admitted that it was absurd, but she wanted to see it too. Tomoya then apologized to Utaha for ruining her script, changing the characters' personalities and backstories. Utaha, however, said that even though her characters were changed so they could live, they were not dead. They were alive, crying, laughing, and loved by everyone. Playing the game made Utaha happy, excited, and thrilled. The script wasn't just written by someone else, nor was it solely hers or Tomoya's, it was their original final scenario. Hearing that, Tomoya was so moved that he couldn't hold back his tears. That night, there was a bonfire event at the school. Since the script was finally completed, Utaha decided to attend. That evening, she met Megumi and told her that her job was done now that the script was finished. She handed the rest over to Megumi because she had to focus on completing her novel. Megumi then asked if Ruri was actually Seiyuka from Metronome of Love since she had read both stories. Utaha confirmed that Ruri and Seiyuka were indeed based on the same person, because the author was inexperienced and antisocial, only capable of drawing inspiration from things close to her. Ruri was a strong-willed, cruel woman who was also lonely. Utaha admitted that she had hoped Ruri would be the one chosen by the protagonist. Before Megumi left, Utaha told her that it wasn't too late. She was sure Megumi could turn the stubborn protagonist into someone better. Utaha then urged Megumi to take action. That night, Tomoya found himself stranded at the bonfire event, surrounded by couples dancing together. Feeling out of place, he quickly tried to leave the crowd. Just then, he heard a voice calling him Big Brother. Tomoya turned around to see Megumi addressing him, telling him not to leave Ruri all alone like that. Megumi approached him and said that she was Ruri, the one who had been calling out to Tomoya for years. She then took his hand and told him that at that moment, she was both Ruri and Seiyuka. As she led him into a dance, Utaha and Eriri watched them from a distance. Eriri, inspired by the scene, immediately started sketching them as they danced together. That day, Megumi was in the back courtyard of the school with a male student. It seemed like the male student was confessing his love to Megumi. Tomoya, Utaha, and Eriri were observing from a distance. Tomoya was utterly shocked by what he saw. According to Utaha, based on Tomoya's possessive reaction when a romantic rival appeared, he was the type of protagonist with a weak mindset. If Tomoya were to say that he had only just realized his feelings for Megumi, it would mean his level of hopelessness had doubled. Tomoya quickly told Utaha to be quiet because he wanted to try and listen to their conversation. From what they could see, it seemed like Megumi rejected the male student as he walked away with his head down. That afternoon, Tomoya, Utaha, Eriri, and Megumi gathered in the audiovisual room for a meeting. Utaha commented that Megumi was indeed somewhat attractive, but she had never stood out much. However, thanks to the acting training she had given Megumi and the outfits Eriri had chosen for her, she was starting to look more like a true female protagonist. Because of that, it was no surprise that male students had started showing interest in her. Tomoya, on the other hand, hadn't planned on introducing her to the public until the game was released during the Winter Comiket, but he hadn't expected her progress to be this significant already. Megumi, however, expressed her displeasure at Tomoya and Utaha interfering in her personal matters and making decisions so openly on her behalf. Utaha then asked why Megumi rejected the male student's confession. Megumi admitted that if she were to start dating, she would be busy going on dates every weekend. The problem was that they were about to enter the final phase of the game's development, which meant she would be completely occupied. There were still scripts to complete, testing to be done, promotions to handle, and preparations for the event. She simply wouldn't have the time to think about anything else until the Winter Comiket arrived. Tomoya was deeply moved by Megumi's dedication. However, Utaha immediately pushed his head down and told him that while she completely understood Megumi's passion for their game development, if the illustrations weren't finished by the deadline, their participation in the Winter Comiket would remain just a dream. Eriri then asked whether the writer and director, who had delayed finishing the script and even added a new route, had anything to say about it. Hearing Eriri's sarcasm, Tomoya immediately dropped to his knees and apologized. Utaha stated that they had already rescheduled everything, yet Eriri was still lagging behind. If they were following the schedule properly, Eriri should have finished her work already, even with the addition of a new route. Eriri, however, defended herself, saying she hadn't yet found the perfect image for the female protagonist. Megumi then apologized to her. Utaha questioned whether that was truly the reason Eriri was struggling, pointing out that Eriri had been overly fixated on quality, to the point where a lot of time had been wasted. Eriri became frustrated, feeling as though her efforts had been in vain. Utaha clarified that she didn't mean it that way, but the reality was that the time spent didn't match the actual results. Tensions escalated as Utaha and Eriri began arguing. Tomoya quickly stepped in to break it up, saying that if they were going to get angry, they should take it out on him as the director instead. He reassured Eriri, saying that he believed in her ability to finish the work. Utaha, however, remained skeptical, since this was Eriri's first time drawing illustrations for a game. But Tomoya remained firm in his belief, pointing out that Eriri had completed many works as a manga artist. Hearing Tomoya's words, Eriri was touched. Tomoya continued, saying that in all her past projects, Eriri had always completed them, and her manga releases had always gone smoothly. He even called her an outstanding creator who would surely deliver results that met expectations. Utaha, looking irritated at Tomoya's praises, watched as Eriri regained her enthusiasm and promised that she would complete the work. No matter what, she vowed to meet the deadline. Tomoya remarked that they had ended up in this situation because he had always placed his trust in Eriri. Eriri swore she would finish the work, deciding to isolate herself until she completed everything. She even went as far as skipping school just to focus on her work. Tomoya was baffled by how the situation had gotten so extreme. By his calculations based on her usual pace, Eriri should have finished already. Eriri simply replied that she had a lot riding on this. She then bid farewell and promised to update Tomoya via phone every day. Finally, Tomoya agreed to wait for her. Before she left, Tomoya asked one last time to make sure. Would she really come back and not just disappear? Eriri reassured him once again before leaving. On Monday afternoon, Tomoya, Megumi, and Utaha met at a cafe. Tomoya told them about Eriri going to a villa to be alone for a while. Utaha, however, said that Eriri wouldn't come back, which made Tomoya even more worried. Megumi was also very concerned about Eriri staying alone at the villa. Tomoya reassured them that Eriri would be fine since he had been to that villa before and there was a convenience store nearby. However, Utaha argued that the real issue was not about the location but the fact that leaving a creator under a tight deadline alone in the middle of the woods was a major mistake for a director. Tomoya explained that Eriri had gone there to meet her deadline. Utaha called him naive, saying his decision was as bad as giving overly sweet ice cream to a diabetic. Tomoya even showed them the message Eriri had sent the day before, where she updated him on her condition and sent 2 image files. Megumi felt more reassured, and Tomoya added that the deadline was still a week away. Utaha warned that this was only the beginning. She had heard a story from her editor friend Sunoko about the typical signs of a creator trying to escape from their work, and she advised Tomoya to be cautious. The first stage was that their words became harsher. The second stage involved self-blame. The third stage saw increasingly delayed replies. The fourth stage was when they started saying things like wanting to die or not being able to go on, and the fifth stage was when they would completely cut off contact. There was even a sixth stage where some creators disappeared, only to be found later working under a new pen name alongside another man on a different project. So in the end, the man they left behind didn't need to worry too much. The key takeaway was that if Tomoya started noticing these signs in Eriri's messages, he had to be on alert. Megumi then asked how long Eriri planned to stay there. Tomoya expected her to return before the deadline on Monday morning. After leaving the cafe, Megumi suggested they visit Eriri in Nasukojin on Saturday, planning to stay overnight and bring her back together. Tomoya immediately pointed out the awkwardness of Megumi, suggesting that a guy stay overnight with 2 girls. Megumi casually reminded him that during their previous training camp, one guy had played around with 4 girls and no one had minded. Tomoya, however, declined, saying he had his own deadline to meet. Megumi understood and decided to cancel her plan, opting instead to help Tomoya with his work over the weekend. Tomoya gratefully thanked her. Megumi then joked that it was strange how different girls kept staying over at a guy's place every week, making her even more curious about his social circle. On Tuesday, Eriri contacted Tomoya and sent him an illustration she had completed. Tomoya was surprised that she only sent one. Eriri had successfully finished Ruri's route and was now working on the main route that Tomoya had written. According to Eriri, Tomoya's scenario had a different tone compared to the other routes, which required a distinct approach to both line art and coloring. Because of this, her progress might be slower from that point onward. Tomoya was shocked to hear this but decided to wait patiently until Eriri was satisfied with her work. That day, Tomoya sat with Utaha in the school courtyard, updating her on Eriri's progress. Utaha had already predicted that leaving Eriri alone had been a huge mistake. However, Tomoya still had faith in Eriri, who had never abandoned a project before. Utaha once again reminded Tomoya that the first stage was starting to speak harshly, and that night, Eriri was likely to enter the second stage. Tomoya said that things were still fine yesterday even if she had only completed one page. Utaha responded that if an artist had stopped drawing, then it was over. Besides, Tomoya had no idea when Eriri would be able to draw again, especially since she had mentioned wanting to change her drawing style. In reality, artists are at their most vulnerable when trying something new. Utaha understood exactly what Eriri was going through. Suddenly, Utaha remembered that she still hadn't figured out the plot for her new light novel. She regretted choosing a school harem setting and thought it would have been better to go with a simple young romance story instead. Tomoya told her that he was really looking forward to her new series. He was confident that everything would be fine and that Eriri wouldn't give up. He believed she had already calculated everything. He was sure that Eriri would meet her deadline with her usual art style. Utaha dismissed his words, saying that this wasn't a matter of faith, it was simply the attitude of someone who had no expectations. She then asked if Tomoya saw Eriri as nothing more than a creator with a bleak future. Tomoya denied ever saying such a thing. Utaha argued that Eriri wouldn't be able to change her art style, nor would she grow even when faced with a challenge that demanded growth. Instead, she would return without ever trying. Tomoya was confused. Wasn't he also hoping for Eriri to improve? Utaha then directly asked him if he actually wanted Eriri to grow as an artist. It had nothing to do with her personally, but Utaha found herself frustrated. She admitted that she disliked Eriri, but she still respected her more than Tomoya did, even though he was supposed to know her best. That was what irritated Utaha the most. Without another word, she walked away. That night, Eriri messaged Tomoya, saying she hadn't been able to complete anything. She felt completely stuck because she had gotten so used to Utaha's scripts over the past 6 months that she didn't know how to adjust to Tomoya's. Tomoya told her she was overthinking it. It was just a script, after all. Eriri had actually drawn several pages as an experiment, but she wasn't satisfied with them. If she used the same style, she feared it wouldn't fit the tone of Tomoya's writing, so she scrapped everything. Tomoya was shocked. "What do you mean you threw everything away?" Eriri admitted she had never experienced anything like this before. She hadn't made any progress at all. She didn't even understand what was happening to her. Tomoya told her not to put so much pressure on herself and to just draw like she always did. Eriri reassured him that she would meet the deadline and that she would handle this on her own because it was her own problem. Tomoya told her it wasn't her fault, but before he could say anything else, Eriri hung up the phone. With that, she had officially entered the second stage, self-blame. That night, Tomoya even dreamed about Eriri apologizing to him, and the dream startled him awake. By Friday, Tomoya still hadn't heard anything from Eriri. She hadn't contacted him at all. Megumi considered calling her, but it didn't seem like the right time. It was clear that Eriri had now entered the third stage, delayed responses. Tomoya started wondering if they should just cancel the main route altogether. Megumi reminded him that it was the first scenario he had ever written. However, Tomoya replied that it didn't seem all that great, and even if they scrapped it, it wouldn't really matter. Megumi disagreed, saying that Eriri would never accept that decision. She had originally planned to say something encouraging, but seeing Tomoya's attitude at that moment made her hold back. Tomoya was puzzled as to why Megumi had been acting so harsh toward him lately. Megumi told him that if anything happened over the weekend, he had to let her know. Even if it wasn't about Nasukogen, she would still come. Tomoya thanked her. Megumi was still worried about Eriri and hoped she was eating properly, but Tomoya mentioned that she was only eating instant noodles. Megumi hoped Eriri wouldn't get sick. Her excessive concern made Tomoya tease her, saying she sounded like a mom. Megumi was even worried that Eriri might catch a cold since it was colder there than in Tokyo. This made Tomoya recall the time 9 years ago when he went there with Eriri, and it was indeed freezing. Meanwhile, Eriri was sitting on the terrace of her villa, staring blankly into the distance. She had repeatedly failed to draw and still hadn't found the right inspiration. As she gazed at the villa's yard, the first snowfall of the season began. Moments later, the dialogue for the game scenario started flowing naturally in her mind. Inspiration struck, and she suddenly imagined the game's characters standing before her. That midnight, Eriri suddenly called Tomoya, excitedly telling him that it was snowing beautifully at her villa. She also assured him that she was confident she could meet her deadline. Tomoya could hardly believe what he was hearing. Eriri explained that she had just come up with an idea for her drawing style and that she could finally finish everything. She realized that unlike in the art club where objects and backgrounds were drawn together, game illustrations required them to be separated. That difference had been bothering her all along. Tomoya asked if Ariri planned to change her entire drawing style. Ariri confirmed it, saying she would alter everything. First, she would paint the scenes, then scan them to separate the objects from the backgrounds. Tomoya then asked how many pages she had completed so far. Ariri admitted that she was just about to start. Tomoya was shocked, knowing that time was running out, but Ariri confidently claimed that she could draw more than 5 pages a day. Tomoya doubted she could pull it off, but Ariri was determined. As long as Tomoya believed in her, she was sure she could do it. Ariri even admitted that she liked the route Tomoya had written. Even though the happy ending felt a bit forced, she could still feel the joy in it. Because of that, she would finish her work, no matter what anyone said. She was determined to complete it. That very night, Ariri started painting while gazing at the scenery outside her villa. Inspiration kept coming as she saw the game characters and their dialogue materializing in her imagination. The happy ending in Tomoya's route was beautiful. The protagonist could bring happiness to both Ruri and Meguri. Ariri could see that happiness unfolding right before her eyes in her mind's vision. She even asked Tomoya to cheer her on by saying that she could do it, that she was amazing, a genius, and that she should hurry up and start drawing. Tomoya simply told her to do whatever she wanted. On Sunday, Ariri called Tomoya to tell him that she had finished everything. However, her voice was so weak that it was clear she wasn't doing well. Moments later, Ariri collapsed. Tomoya panicked, repeatedly calling out her name over the phone. That morning, Ariri woke up from her bed, realizing that it had been a while since she last pushed herself to the limit. She suddenly remembered that it was Monday and that she hadn't sent her illustration files to Tomoya yet. Quickly, she got up to send the files, but as she stepped onto the floor, she accidentally stepped on Tomoya's face, who had been sleeping on the floor. Tomoya screamed and begged her to stop stepping on him. The night before, Tomoya had met with Iori, who introduced him to Akane, the person handling finances for their creative circle. Tomoya greeted Akane and asked what was going on. Iori explained that when Tomoya had called him, he was in a business meeting with Akane, and after hearing about Tomoya's situation, Akane herself had suggested bringing him along. Tomoya felt bad as he had only intended to borrow money from Iori. Iori mentioned that taking a train or taxi would take a long time, especially if he had already missed the last train. So Iori decided to take him straight to Nasukojin. Tomoya explained that Ariri had been isolating herself there and was sick. Since her parents were in England at the time, Tomoya took the initiative to visit her. Iori then asked whether Tomoya had managed to send the final copy of his work to the media. Tomoya replied that worrying about that was not his priority at the moment as Ariri was unwell. Hearing this, Iori felt that Tomoya had changed. He was no longer the same person as before. Tomoya admitted that he was neither intelligent, calm, nor cold like Iori. However, Iori was surprised by how much Tomoya had accomplished. Over 2 megabytes of script, more than 30 songs, and if the illustrations were completed, there would be hundreds of illustrated pages in Tomoya's game. Tomoya had only just realized how massive his project had become. Iori insisted that Tomoya still had time to send the final copy and wondered how he managed to push his team this far. Was his creative circle just for fun? Tomoya firmly stated that he had never treated it as a joke. Iori acknowledged that Tomoya had always been serious from the very beginning. He then argued that Tomoya shouldn't have gone to Nasukojin and should have left this matter to someone else while he stayed home to finish the final copy. To Tomoya, such an approach seemed cold and selfish. He couldn't just leave Iori's situation to someone else. Meanwhile, Megumi tried to call Tomoya, but he didn't answer. Iori suspected that Tomoya just wanted Ariri to be his and his alone. Tomoya was shocked to hear that remark. Upon arriving at the villa, Tomoya immediately went inside and saw Ariri's scattered illustrations. He was stunned when he found Ariri lying weakly on the floor. Tomoya quickly asked Iori to help him carry her to the bed. Iori then asked Akane to bring in the supplies from the car. Before Iori left, Tomoya thanked him. Iori mentioned that he had contacted a company he was acquainted with, and they were willing to wait until noon. He advised Tomoya to reach out to his friends in Tokyo to finish the final copy. That meant there was still half a day left to work on it, and Iori was confident that Tomoya could pull it off. Tomoya expressed his gratitude, and Iori replied that as long as the problem could be solved with money and connections, it wasn't a big deal for him. That morning, Tomoya told Ariri that she had likely caught the flu and needed to rest. Ariri mentioned that it had been a long time since she last had the flu, but Tomoya reminded her that she used to get sick often. during the Hinadal Festival, the Shichigosen Festival, and even on Christmas. Eriri asked how her illustrations turned out, and Tomoya told her that all 7 pages were great. Eriri was overjoyed. Tomoya then told her that her task was complete and asked her to take a break. Eriri assumed that the game was finished and that everything was going well. She also thought that Tomoya had already inserted her illustrations into the game and integrated them. However, that was not the case at all. Tomoya hadn't even added her illustrations to the game yet. Upon hearing this, Eriri was, of course, furious with him. Tomoya asked her not to push herself too hard. Eriri urged Tomoya not to waste time to finish it quickly because she knew that he was someone who always gave his all and never gave up. Tomoya replied that he had already made his choice between a sick friend and a looming deadline. Eriri argued that he should have chosen both, but Tomoya said it was already too late. Eriri accused Tomoya of wasting her hard work from the past week and of disregarding the efforts of all the other members over the past 6 months. Tomoya explained that only the final part wouldn't be completed in time for the Winter Comiket, and the rest could still be finished. Even if they had to delay the release, it wouldn't change much. Eriri was disappointed with his decision. It was obvious that Tomoya truly wanted to release the game, especially considering all the hard work the members of Blessing Software had put in together. Eriri called him an idiot and cried her heart out. Tomoya tried to comfort her. Eriri apologized to Tomoya for failing to keep her promise. Tomoya stayed by Eriri's side all day, taking care of her because he was afraid that if he left, she might not make it. At 10 a.m., Tomoya urged Eriri to eat something. He reassured her that missing just a little wouldn't reduce the value of their game, especially since they could still sell 100 copies at the Winter Comiket if they duplicated them themselves. Eriri pointed out that if that were the case, their circle wouldn't be able to defeat Rouge and Izumi. Tomoya told her not to worry about that anymore. Eriri replied that if she didn't, she wouldn't be able to be Tomoya's number 1. Tomoya was puzzled as to why she said that, considering that all of her illustrations were incredible and the best he had seen that year. He even admitted that he got chills when he first saw them. They were realistic yet passionate, beautiful, and sweet. Eriri gathered the courage to ask if her illustrations were better than Izumi's or any other illustrators. Tomoya nodded. She then asked if that meant she was his number 1. Tomoya nodded again. Eriri was ecstatic that she had surpassed Izumi, Michiru, and even Utaha. However, Tomoya flicked her forehead and told her that he never said anything like that. He then urged her to hurry up and eat her porridge. Eriri complained that she preferred instant noodles. That night, Tomoya and Eriri played a game together using Eriri's favorite character, Service. When Tomoya had to choose a gift for Service, he picked a ruby brooch. However, Eriri told him that he should have chosen a ring instead so that he could hear Service's proposal.